Hello everyone, Mike here, and today we're taking a look at the Sony Xperia T, Sony's new flagship smartphone for the end of 2012 and the beginning of 2013 that will replace the Xperia S. This one brings a new design, improved camera, larger screen, faster hardware and an updated OS. But let's see if it will be capable to go toe-to-toe with the other top Android phones out there. And of course, if you like the clip, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share it to your friends. Alright, we're going to start by having a look at the Xperia T. This is definitely not an ugly phone. In fact, Sony put a lot of effort into creating a smartphone that will stand out from the crowd, and their new flagship has a distinct design with a slightly curved rear. The overall shape makes the phone a bit more interesting and also quite comfortable to hold in hand. The soft matte plastic finishing used for the rear also helps with the grip and won't scratch easily, but some might consider it a bit cheap. I for one did not. On the front there's a sheet of glass covering the 4.7-inch display, flanked by some inclined glossy plastic edges. Notice that Sony dropped the dedicated Android buttons, and those are now part of the UI, occupying the lower part of the screen. There's an Xperia logo below the screen, while on top you'll find the speaker, the front-facing HD camera, some sensors and the useful notification LED, which however is tiny and difficult to spot unless you're using the phone in a dark room or at night. The Xperia T is not a compact handset, but has a slightly smaller footprint than most of its competitors that sport a big screen, while being a tad thicker. It's also a bit heavier, weighing close to 140 grams. On the sides, the Xperia T packs a bunch of buttons and connectors. Most of them, however, are cramped on the left. Over here, you'll notice that the power button sits in the middle, while the volume rocker and the camera button are below that, all pretty close one to another. Sony says that these buttons are laser cut and they do feel nice, but that doesn't change their placement issue. Trying to unlock the screen with your thumb is doable, but surprisingly more comfortable if you're a lefty than a righty. Easily adjusting the volume while using the phone is not though, no matter the camp you're in. Not to mention that you'll have a hard time picking one from the other blindly with the phone in your pocket. All this because Sony placed a flap cover on the upper right side, hiding beneath the micro SIM and micro SD card slots. And speaking about that, it doesn't feel as carefully manufactured as the rest of the handset, as it seems like it just won't fit perfectly in place once you open it once. Besides this, on top there's a headphone jack, while on the left you'll find a micro USB port. As for the plastic rear side, you'll notice that it's not removable, so you won't be able to easily access the battery or replace it if needed. A 13 megapixel camera sits in the top part of the back panel, while the speaker is placed on the bottom. However, there's one thing you should know about the camera cover. Since it's the thickest part of the phone, it's also the most exposed, and it will easily catch dust and lint inside, so you'll always have to check if it's scuff-free when preparing to take photos, which can be annoying. On the other hand, there's a bulge around the camera lens itself, which should keep it safe from scratches. Overall, the Xperia T is for sure an interesting looking device. With a 4.7-inch screen and no dedicated Android buttons, it's more compact than the other top Android phones available today. But the extra weight and the fatter body makes me feel like I'm holding a much larger device. I already mentioned that there's a 4.7-inch screen on the Xperia T, slightly smaller than the ones on the HTC One X or the Samsung Galaxy S3, and in fact that makes it easier to cover with your thumb, although the average hand-sized person might still struggle a bit with that. The display itself is awesome, as we expected from a Sony flagship. It's a Bravia Power 720p LCD panel, which translates in around 320 ppi pixel density. The contrast is good for an LCD. The colors are natural and vibrant as well, as long as you're watching the screen head-on. Otherwise, the narrow viewing angles will show the limitation of an LCD panel. But at least you don't get any of those pesky color distortions noticeable on AMOLED screens. Win some, lose some. As I mentioned before, the on-screen Android buttons are part of the display itself, which eats some of the landscape but also means that they will rotate with the action, fade when not being used, and overall react smooth and fast to your commands, which is something I appreciated. Sadly, there's only Android 4.0 ice cream sandwich on the Xperia T, so no Project Butter or any of the smoothness brought by Jelly Bean. Not yet at least. But that's not really a massive issue, as the UI is smooth and mostly snappy and consistent. However, the Xperia T packs a heavily customized Android, so it looks like Sony has its own touch for all the important Android features and apps, plus a bunch of their own. We'll start with the 5 customizable home screens, which can now rotate when using the phone in landscape mode. There's a row of dock tabs on the bottom and those are visible on all of the screens. Sony implemented this mode called Overview that quickly helps you find something on any of the home screen, and you can pinch to see all of the active widgets, but I would have appreciated if they left me alter the number of those screens, as you're stuck with 5, no more, no less. Sony also added a bunch of their own widgets that you can pin to the home screens, although I feel like many of you might just leave those untapped as they might seem confusing. There are, however, a bunch of useful apps and tweaks. For instance, there's this thing called Facebook inside Xperia that quickly integrates your Facebook account with the contacts and the galleries on your phone. Then you get the new Walkman app and the widget that lets you control your media without having to unlock the screen. There's a useful gallery app that lets you sort your pics by date and interconnects with Facebook, but also allows you to pinch and zoom on thumbnails. Timescape could be useful as well if you're a social animal, as it brings all your social accounts together. And if you happen to have plenty of Bravia devices around your house, you'll probably appreciate the media controller that lets you use the phone as a remote control. Besides those, the notification area was tweaked, adding a bunch of extra toggles for main functions and connectivity options. And there's a new multitasking panel as well that lets you scroll between running apps like with all ICS multitasking screens, but also allows you to easily launch a calendar, a memo or others. All these are called small notes, and more should be added later on the Play Store. Speaking of that, with Sony phones you get access to their own store, where you'll be able to find a bunch of custom Sony apps, but also plenty of content, from games to music, videos and books. But unless you're already a Sony user, this might feel like another ecosystem trying to grab your credit card. All in all, there are plenty of things to like about the Sony Xperia T UI, but also things that need more tweaking. The experience is overall consistent once you understand what each particular app and widget should do, but a new Xperia user could be overwhelmed by all the changes, tweaks and custom apps. Like I said above, the Xperia T is a solid everyday performer. The UI is fairly smooth and there's little of that lag we encounter on Android smartphones in the past. The powerful hardware inside sure helps here. There's a Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 dual-core processor on the Xperia T, clocked at 1.5 GHz, Adreno 225 GPU and 1 GB of RAM, plus 16 GB of storage space. I also ran a couple of synthetic benchmarks and the scores I got are good, putting Sony's flagship on par with the other top Android smartphones of the moment. All in all, the dual-core crate config flies and can match or even surpass the quad-core rivals on most heads, although it trails them in browsing and graphics tests. But the results should also improve when Sony decides to update the Xperia T to Android Jelly Bean. The Xperia T also dealt well with the basic phone task, making and receiving calls. I did not encounter any problems with the signal strength or dropped calls, so nothing to complain here. Video calls worked fine as well. Of course, the top smartphone also acts as a multimedia powerhouse, and as a Sony device, the Xperia T also connects with Sony's multimedia services, whether we're talking video, music or others. Music and Video Unlimited allow you to easily access your content, but so does Google's or Amazon's service. In fact, if you're already familiar with Sony's ecosystem, you'll feel right at home with the Xperia T. Otherwise, you can easily stick to your own favorite content source. The Movie app works fine on this phone and it will handle all kinds of HD content. It also integrates a video editing app and a bunch of useful features like the ability to push your movies towards a DLNA connected TV. The Music app is actually the old classic Walkman and works as expected. In fact, I'm sure many of you will be satisfied with the audio quality as long as you use a proper pair of headphones with this phone. You can even control it from the lock screen like I already mentioned above, and the Album app is quite nice as well. It's time to talk about the camera and well, this is where the 30 megapixel shooter on the back has the chance to shine. And it does, just make sure there are no scuffs blocking that recessed lens before taking your pics. I've added a bunch of sample photos here just to see what can come out of this camera. The macros are fine, the shooter can take panoramas and even does a decent job in low light, although the results will get quite grainy in this case. Still, there's one thing to have in mind, the camera tends to overexpose the stills in bright light. Luckily, this can be easily rectified as the Xperia T not only comes with a nice camera, but also a carefully designed interface with plenty of options. You can select between several different capture modes, adjust exposure, white balance, the focus points, and even customize the interface you're getting when using the camera. There's also a dedicated camera button on the left side of the phone and it will launch the camera and take a pic in a second or so. The button feels right and it's stiff enough so it won't get accidentally pressed in your pocket, but sensitive enough to be comfortable when used. The Xperia T can also shoot 1080p 30 frames per second videos and the results are alright, although the overexposure is visible here as well. Luckily, you're able to adjust the exposure for videos too, so as long as you get familiar with the options, the results should be alright. There's a sealed 1850 mAh battery inside the Sony Xperia T, which is rather small. Luckily, the S4 platform is quite efficient and the results are not that bad, although when compared to the other heavyweight Android phones, the Xperia T falls a bit short here. You get around 8 hours of 3G talk, around 6 for browsing over 3G and video watching, and a lot more for listening to music. Still, with medium to heavy use, the Xperia T will barely be able to last through the day. Thus, if you're after the Xperia T, you should probably save some duff for an external battery as well. All in all, while there's nothing groundbreaking about the Xperia T, Sony managed to put together a solid smartphone here. Yes, it might fall short in front of the big Androids here and there, but it's also going to be cheaper than those. And it's not like there are any major gripes with the Xperia T. Yes, a bigger battery was needed, especially since the phone is heavier than its competitors, and yes, the screen has rather poor viewing angles, the UI is a bit cluttered and confusing for a new Xperia user, and Jelly Bean by default would have been nice. But besides those, the Xperia T pretty much shines. The screen pops excellent colors, the body is sturdy and beautiful, the UI is fairly smooth, the hardware is fast, the camera is excellent, and there are plenty of ports around the sides. Oh, and I should mention that some of the guys around the office didn't quite like the overall shape of the phone and how it feels in hand, but I for one enjoyed it and will take that matte finishing on the Xperia T over the glossy coating on the Samsungs every day. So is this Sony Xperia T better than its competitors? Well, that's up to each one of you to decide, but I for one feel that this is a worthy flagship phone and should at least be considered when shopping for a top handset this year. With that in mind, it's time to end this clip. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it and I'll ask you all to share it to your friends if you did and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. And I'll leave you with a question. If you have to name one thing that you love about the Sony Xperia T, what would it be? Please leave your replies below, I'm looking forward to reading them and I'll see you all soon.